now the Lions on the offensive line, there's going to be some changes this upcoming season. It's a lot of competition. We bring in Tristan Colon. And on top of that, you have Graham Glasgow, who a lot of people knock what he did this past season. I think there's a lot of concerns that stem from that. Like, hey, man, Kevin Zettler's not back for the Lions. He leaves in free agency. And all of a sudden, Frank Ragnow then retires. So now it's like, okay, Tate Ratledge going to center. That seems to be the thought here. And I do think that's going to end up being his best spot in the NFL. Now, I didn't think it had to be right away. And I still don't necessarily think that has to be the case, even though that seems like that's where it's leaning right now. I think ultimately the best spot for Ratledge will be at center. That didn't necessarily mean that, hey, year one, it has to be at center. If, say, for example, Graham Glasgow's more comfortable there, you put him at that spot and you allow Tate Ratledge to play guard. That's fine with me. Whatever works, whatever gets your best five on the field as a unit. Thought process of Tate Ratledge going to center. A lot of the concern, I think, stems around Graham Glasgow at guard, the step back that he apparently took this past season. And I wanted to dive into that because I don't remember it that well in terms of what actually it looked like, in terms of like what was the big reason for people believing he took such a big step back this past year. So I dove back into the 2024 game film, went through about 6 of the games this past season, also took a look at the game that he played center this past year just to get a sense on what that was, and really decide how comfortable was I with Graham Glasgow. If I just take last season alone, how comfortable do I feel as a fan of Graham Glasgow starting at guard, say, this upcoming season, and what that's going to look like? Is that really a massive concern? Should we be looking elsewhere at that position? And then also on top of that, there was a player that I entered in this with, and this is Khalil Dorsey. And I want to talk about Khalil Dorsey a little bit too, because he signed the 2-year deal this offseason back with the Lions. And Khalil Dorsey is ever since we had Khalil Dorsey in the preseason, I thought he stood out. You know, we had a lot of young guys. We had Stephen Gilmore at the time. But the guy that I thought was always the most consistent, always stood out to me, was Khalil Dorsey. And he ends up sticking around with the Lions. And I went back because he played in really about 3 games this past year. He had a couple of snaps in some other games, but really 3 games that he played in toward the end of the game this past season. And I wanted to check out those 3 games and see how he performed. What did it look like? Was there improvement there? Why did the Lions give this guy a 2-year deal? Had the new additions like Rock Ya-Sin, who really there's no guarantees until like, hey, look at his contract. This guy's definitely sticking around. Cornerback position, if he keeps 6, like there are real openings there. Khalil Dorsey has also done some kick returning for us in the past as well. So I wanted to dive into Khalil Dorsey, kind of get a thought on like, okay, where's Khalil Dorsey at? Is he taking steps forward? Why did he get the 2-year deal? And what should we maybe keep an eye on for with that positional group in terms of competition, and why maybe we shouldn't be overlooking Khalil Dorsey? And I'll be honest with you, when going back and watching those 3 games, man, I'm like, this guy is getting a lot better. He looked really good in those 3 games. And I think that he deserves some attention. So we're going to give him that attention. $300K guaranteed, 2 years, $3.3 million. So you feel a little bit more confidence within that kind of contract that the Lions laid out here. And also in terms of the competition that could be available on the market, like, hey, we want to keep this guy around. So why that confidence? What did the Lions see from Khalil Dorsey, specifically this past season? And the little bit that he played, 46 coverage snaps against Dallas, Tennessee, and Chicago. In Chicago, he played 32 defensive snaps. I do think the cornerback room the Lions currently have, it could end up being the strongest cornerback room that they've had in the Brad Holmes era. And I don't think it could be particularly not really close. Like DJ Reed could end up being absolutely the best cornerback that we've seen in the Brad Holmes era. Now, I think in long term, I think that's going to end up being Terran Arnold. But like as of now, he could be the best cornerback that we've had under Brad Holmes. On top of it, then you get to the depth, and we know that we vested some of the young guys. You're hoping that they take steps forward, or you still have the same young guys. And then you get to the depth because of that. When you start to go through the depth that we have with Amik Robertson, the Leo Dorsey's, and the Rock Ya-Sins who were brought in, and the Stanley Thomas Oliver, you start to go down the list. I do think this could be the best cornerback room that we've had. Depth-wise, there's going to be some good players that are going to be cut this offseason. And at the top, it could be the strongest top end we've had at that position as well. I've always liked Khalil Dorsey as a player. I always felt like going back to the preseason, he was the guy that would consistently stand out. He was the guy that showed incredible movement skills. And then he was putting that on film. Like while Rakestraw was getting his snaps, he's kind of working inside, outside. You have Dorsey, who's just holding it down and being consistent on the outside when his number was called upon. And in a lot of those games, because we were blowing the other team out, like Tennessee and like Dallas. So the quick movement speed there. This was not a big cornerback. I think he's 5'9". Ability in zone coverage to kind of cut guys off really early on reps. You would also see that the recovery burst was super noticeable. The movement skills, the body control that he showcases underneath, the body control level 1 is great to me. Here, guys off the press, the footwork, the back pedal, the ability to kind of flow with players off the line of scrimmage. I've always liked the movement skills at the line of scrimmage, and I think that showed up this past season. But then also having some of that recovery burst to deal with double moves, to get back into the play. play, showing that kind of movement skills. We've, of course, seen that as a returner as well. To me, the positioning when he gets back into plays, when he's trying to recover, when he's squeezing receivers down the field. Also, of course, like some of the physicality that he's played with. Khalil Dorsey, not the biggest corner, but he always plays with a physical style. And I think that does represent the Lions well, and I think they like him because of that as well, that he's willing to mix it up. He's willing to get physical at the line of scrimmage. He's willing to jam guys at the line of scrimmage, and he shows the body control, and he shows the base and some of the power there as well, and some of the physicality to be a little bit disruptive off the line. Now, it gets him into some trouble the further downfield you get him snapping off a route, and you'll give up some separation, or he may lose some connection at the top of the route in those spots. But early on plays, he shows all the physicality. He's physical as a tackler as well. He'll show it at the catch point as well. We'll see that physicality, and we'll get to that here in a second. Then he gets to some of the versatility defensively, like you put him in some of these half-turn coverages, some of the cover 3 assignments that he has to deal with, and I think he's super comfortable there. I love the movement skills in half-turn. I love the ability to, hey, guy gets in my blind spot, I can flip around and go chase that down. I can track it down. I can take it away. Some of the aggression that he can play with, where he can plant and drive, he can sit on top of routes and get himself to a spot where he can read through the stem of routes and be aggressive to kind of cut things off and take things away, but have the movement skills for recovery if the ball ultimately does not end up going there. I've always loved the movement skills that he's had in cover 3, and I think that suits him a lot better to play in that kind of style versus, say, when he has to play like a cover 2. And this is where all of a sudden you see some of the inability to play with consistent depth, and also some of the lack of length kind of comes into play. I like his physicality. He can cut things off early, right? He'll take guys away at the line of scrimmage, but in terms of like balancing a high-low concept, that's not where he's necessarily going to thrive. I also don't think he played with consistent depth in those spots either. So if you put him in an underneath coverage, I just didn't think his depth was always that consistent. You would see inconsistencies like the big Buffalo play. Like, he gave up really 2 legitimate receptions this past season in the 46 coverage snaps that he had, according to Pro NFL. One of them, unfortunately, was a 60-yard reception that he gave up against Buffalo, where he was a culprit of, hey, you're in cover 3. You can't let the guy get behind you as a deep third, and he let the guy get behind him on a scramble play. He's got his eyes in the backfield. Josh Allen just takes an absolute heave down the field. He lets the guy get behind him, and he give up a 60-yard reception. Vertical routes before he looks back for the football, and he had a beautiful play against Chicago this past season where, he ends up reading the quarterback. He's playing underneath. The receiver gets vertical, so he flips himself around. He finds the receiver. He tracks him down. He ends up reattaching himself before looking back for the football, and once he reattaches, he finds the football, and the ball is thrown right in his lap, and he's doing that solely based on positioning. It's good positioning that he's playing with. For me, you would see at times like he would give up too much space off the line. I thought that would be a problem footwork wise. He just give too much ground. He'd give too much ground in press situations. He could give a little bit too much ground at the top of the route as well, kind of get pushed off a little bit. He can also tend to get a little bit over aggressive when he's working back into plays, lead to some of that separation at the top of the routes, and he will just lose connection at times there. He oversets me. When I go back and I watch Khalil Dorsey with all of these new additions that we're talking about, and Rocky Sin is probably the main guy. We talked about him, I think it was last week, and I gave him attention, and I think we should have. But the guy that should not be overlooked, all of this, and I think that Khalil Dorsey has been a great definition of a guy that's constantly been overlooked amongst Lions fans. Khalil Dorsey, for me, went from a guy that shined in the preseason, earned his shot with the Lions, the spots over these young guys that we're all getting excited about. We're like, man, how about these guys? How about the Stephen Gilmores? Everybody's pumped up because they're taking passes away. But Mr. Consistency was Khalil Dorsey. He looked like he was outclassing guys in the preseason when he first got a shot. So you see him there first, and you get him into 2023 preseason, and he's really good every game. He's really good for the Lions. He's working his snaps up the last week of the preseason. He ends up playing over 40 snaps. Then all of a sudden, the Lions give him an opportunity in the regular season, and it was really called upon for 2 games. It was Minnesota, and he was called upon specifically the first time, Denver. It was prime time. They called upon him, and in that game, he gave up 2 receptions on 3 targets, 13 yards. But you watch him, and his coverage wasn't great. He didn't feel like he was consistently attaching himself to guys. You felt too much separation in that game, and I didn't think that he was great. And I was clamoring for, man, let's give this guy a shot, because remember at that time, 2023, we're heading into the playoffs. That's when they bring in Kendall Vildor. And I think it was the right move. I love Khalil Dorsey in the preseason, and they gave him a shot, and it didn't look great. They ended up bringing guys like Kendall Vildor, and I thought that he was the best option. So I think they made the right decision there. He needed to grow. He needed to get better. And against Minnesota, he didn't look great either. And it's like, all right, this guy has to get better. And for him to come back in the 2024 preseason for the Lions, have a rough showing, then come back, and he was fantastic against Kansas City. They keep him around for 2024. And in all 3 of those games, you're watching him, you're like, I'd be comfortable if this guy had to play. Like, that's how I felt watching Dorsey. I think a big part of, hey, you lose Kendall Vildor this offseason. He goes and signs with Tampa Bay, and we're thinking about the Rocky Sins that we bring in. I always liked Vildor because I always felt like I knew what I was going to get. He was going to make a lot of plays on the football. His run defense, I thought, took a step back this past year, but he was always going to contest things. He's always going to be physical. He's always going to be feisty. And I thought that, for what he was when you signed him in 2023, what you got out of it was was fine. He had some blunders playoff game, unfortunately, but there was a lot of good underneath that. He did add, I think, some stability to that room, and we absolutely needed it. But Khalil Dorsey, I think when you lose a guy like Vildor and you're like, okay, well, hey, hold up. If you look at it from the perspective of, hey, you're losing kind of a reliable piece to that back end, I think we have to look at Khalil Dorsey as a big reason that the Lions felt comfortable with doing that and losing Kendall Vildor. And they gave him the 2-year deal. It wasn't Rocky Sin that got the 2-year and he got some guarantee money. It was Khalil Dorsey that got that. And I think that we do need to give him attention after what he did this past season, the way that he's continuously grown, the way that he kind of shined in the preseason a couple years ago. He got a shot. It wasn't great. He came back. He responded. And this year looked even better, completely under the radar again, as he kind of has with the Lions. And I do think that if, we end up having to call upon a guy at cornerback, we've talked about Grant Stewart being that guy that may get called upon because of the Malcolm Rodriguez, and we'll see what happens with Alex. And you may really need this guy, and he may be very beneficial like we did last year. Before you know it, you may really need Khalil Dorsey this year. You might need that cornerback 5. Let's just say he makes the team. You might need that guy. And the guy that may end up being one of those under the radar, really key pieces for us could end up absolutely being Khalil Dorsey. He adds stability to a room that needed it. And we think about the development. We talk about a lot of times the rookies and the guys that you draft, and those are the guys that get the attention because they have a draft pick, attached to them. But one of those guys that has constantly been around, the Lions have stuck with, from Matt Nelson, they did this with him. You get Brock Wright as an undrafted free agent. There's these players that the Lions have kept around. You've just seen slow growth. I think that is Khalil Dorsey. Give Dorsey the spotlight because he deserves it, because he's gotten better. And he, to me, could be one of the most underappreciated and a guy that's incredibly valuable this upcoming season. So just keep an eye on Khalil Dorsey, who has constantly got better in a Lions uniform. I want to go to the offensive line because the conversation is mainly about Graham Glasgow. I actually don't think as much as the conversation has been about Tate Ratledge and what that's going to look like, right? It's really been about, he's going to center, which again, I think that makes sense. If he does go to center, I think that makes sense because for him individually, I think that's where his best spot is going to be in the NFL. I liked him. I didn't love him before the draft as a guard. I didn't love him. You can look at my rankings. Now, that said, I didn't watch every snap of him like I did after we selected him. So things do change, but I didn't love him as a guard. I liked him. He was in my top 10. I liked him, but I didn't love him. However, once I watched every snap and I started to see more and more, and I said to myself, this guy looks like a guy with skill sets to be a center in the NFL. That looks like the best Tate Ratledge, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe it's going to be at center. And I said that before all of this, he's playing at center became a thing. So if your best 5 is Tate at center, play him at center. If your best 5 is him at guard, play him at guard. I just think down the road it's ultimately going to be center. But I think the guy that actually draws the biggest questions is Graham Glasgow after this past season. Big fumble in the playoffs, right? That he gave him a bad sack. People aren't as questioning Christian Mahogany because he was really good, but he played 100 snaps. People don't seem to be questioning that. People seem to be pretty confident in Tate Ratledge stepping in wherever he steps in because he drafted him in the second round. Now going to be the 33-year-old interior offensive lineman, the guy that got the 3-year deal. He's the guy that gets questioned. So I said, okay, let me go back. Is this rightfully, questioned in terms of what is this going to look like? Should we look to replace? Is he getting questioned fairly? Because he is an older offensive lineman, and there is injuries that he was dealing with this past year. And I do think that you could make the case that hampered his play, and I think we'll find out pretty darn quickly if that is true. It's pass protection. And if we do just look at it from a statistical perspective, before I even get into what I saw when I watched him, Graham Glasgow was, by any statistical measure, essentially the exact same guy in pass protection that he was in 2023. The guy that everybody loved in 2023, he was essentially the exact same guy in pass protection in 2024. To the extent of PFF graded him the exact same on the season. Now, it's a collection of everything. So you could have just a few games that were completely awful and that could pull your grade way down. You could have many more games that are below or subpar that ends up putting you in the same spot. So it's not a perfect science, but he was graded the exact same. From a statistical perspective, this past season, he allowed 1,080 snaps, which is a ton. So credit to him. And he's doing this. Remember, he's doing this in 2024, a majority at left guard, 1 game at center. In 2023, he's doing a lot more of this at right guard, which could be a conversation. We'll talk about that. So this past season, in 1,080 snaps, he allows 36 pressures, gets the exact same pass protection grade. In 2023, in 1,061 snaps, almost the exact same amount of snaps played, different positions at times, mainly right guard, he allowed 39 pressures. So that same guy that everybody felt really good about just a year ago, the guy that gets questioned, he was statistically essentially the exact same guy in pass protection. So forget the position for a second. He was the same guy by all the numbers. My biggest takeaways from watching it was, to myself, I want to know what he looks like this upcoming year because he was banged up a lot. And it wasn't just everything that was accounted for. It wasn't, the arm injuries and all of a sudden here comes the sleeve that he's putting on and the elbow, and you see these shots that the guy's taken. He took some big shots this past year and he played through it. This guy dealt through a lot. And the more I watched him, the more I gained a respect for him in terms of the toughness. Now, I understand that's an offensive line thing. That's an expectation with an offensive line. These guys are tough. They're rugged. They play through everything. I get that, right? And that was Frank Ragnall's calling card. Graham Glasgow was a lot of that this past year. I gained a lot of respect from Graham just from that alone in terms of this dude is tough. This guy is playing through a lot. This dude is noticeably banged up, and he's playing. And for him this past year was a knee injury in week 3. It was a knee injury that popped back up in week 16 that he didn't play. And Mahogany got his first look there, and he was great. He stepped in for him, which also could lead to some versatility upside as well, because remember, Mahogany was a right guard in college. But in the NFL, his first look was at left guard because he had to replace Graham Glasgow. So the first time we actually got to see him was there because Kevin Zeitler was the right guard. So he actually got his first step at the left guard. He was really good. So there could be optimism if your biggest concern is like, well, maybe moving in a right guard will make him better. If that's your conclusion, then there could be an upside to that because that may be possible. The guy that was initiating all right, let's take the snap. He was initiating that from left guard. Start with the good first. The quickness off the ball is noticeable. He's very quick into his pass sets. He's very quick into his stance. He's very quick off the ball as a run blocker. It's a constant theme with interior offensive linemen. Good offensive linemen in the interior have to set quickly. You got to get off the ball quickly. You got to get to where you're supposed to be quickly to be consistent as an interior offensive line at the NFL level because everything is happening too fast. There's too many quick interior defensive linemen. There's too many 3 techniques that are going to get on your edge incredibly fast off the ball if you're not faster than they are off the ball. You know when the snap count is, so beat them to their spot. And Graham Glasgow did a great job of that this past year. I didn't think he looked overly athletic, but he was very quick off the ball as a pass protector and as a run blocker. A variety of different schemes. You saw it as a wide zone blocker as well. The quickness into his spot, the quickness into his pass sets. 2 things that actually added that tied along with the toughness that I felt that he played with. Those were 2 things that actually gave me some belief that, well, maybe the Lions could end up walking out of training camp and feeling like we think the best 5, it's actually going to be Graham at center and Tate at guard because it could be more comfortable for Graham at center. He does a really good job of centering himself for strikes, centering himself for punches and pass protection. This comes back to the quickness that he would play with off the ball this past year. It also, to me, you see his entry on the second level. I think he played with really good body control. I think he played with really good positioning up to the second level. Here's the thing about Graham. He's always been a really good zone blocker. And the biggest difference from a grading perspective was that 2 years ago, he graded out as an elite run blocker. This past season, he did not. He was basically the same guy by grade as a pass protector, but this past season, he was not the elite run blocker that he was graded as a year ago. But he still was a guy that, to me, was better as a zone blocker, but still showed scheme flexibility, playing a variety of different zone schemes, wide zone, outside zone, inside zone. You can do a lot of different things with him there, and he can play on the play side. He can play on the back side. On the play side, I think what stood out was, hey, man, if he's not the best athlete, his ability to climb to the second level with body control, with pace that was really consistent, was super noticeable. And that gives me a lot of optimism because, again, Zeitler maybe isn't looked up as the best athlete, but on the backside of zone plays, he was phenomenal because what Zeitler would do well is he got off the ball really quickly, he took really good angles to the second level, and he would pace himself really well. And I felt that way with Graham Glasgow on the play side. You run behind him. His ability to get to the next level, really good pacing, really good angles, really good positioning was super noticeable. The entry points to body control, he stayed underneath his toes. He wasn't launching himself in space. He was very consistent there. That was super noticeable for me. As backside zone blocker, it was the quickness off the ball. It's the ability to quickly reach. It was the ability to quickly get himself into a position where he could play wide, play with some bend, which he showcased, consistent wide base and a wide frame that allowed him to absorb some contact as a reach blocker, cut people off, cut guys off on the backside. That was noticeable. So he showed a lot of good still zone in just terms of positioning this past season to me. He also, as a pass protector, showed that, man, this guy's got some big hands. You see it in his punches, and he creates a little bit of force on that initial entry. He's got a plus force that he can create on entry just by jolting with his hands, specifically for me in pass protection. Athletically, that was the biggest difference that I noted. I watched him 2023 to say, okay, well, is it right guard versus left guard? Is that something that I believe was the issue? Was maybe he's just more comfortable at right guard. Maybe his hand usage is just better at right guard. Because we're going to get to it. Hand usage was one of my biggest concerns when I walked away from Graham and watching all those games. Was like, hey, his hand usage just isn't consistent. So maybe it was like, hey, maybe if you put him at right guard, there's more consistency there. I didn't feel like that really mattered for him that much. The big thing that I actually noticed was the difference was athletically, I just didn't think he was moving as well this past year. He's 33 years old. He's dealing with multiple knee injuries. Maybe that had something to do with it. I just didn't think he moved that well. Ultimately, I didn't think he was moving incredibly well. He played with really good pace. He played with body control in space. He didn't drop his weight incredibly well, so guys could kind of slip underneath him. But for the most part, he was controlled. The problem is he didn't move incredibly well. Lateral quickness looked very average. Backside, I didn't think he was going to track guys down consistently because I didn't think he moved that well. Bouncing from block to block as a power piece, he didn't look like he was a mauler. He didn't look like a guy that on initial entry, he was going to push people off their spots, that on double teams, he was going to clear out run lanes. He didn't look like that guy. When I saw that, it said, okay, right guard, left guard, To me, a lot of the things that I would have said, okay, this could be, oh, maybe he's just more comfortable there. It didn't really matter to me. Because to me, he just didn't look athletically fantastic this past season. Very active on entry. He was active with his feet. He'd run his feet. There was a lot of toughness in traffic. To me, he was also, as a down blocker in a gap scheme, he was impactful. He could down block. He could seal guys off. He could play with, again, good entry, a wide base, some power at the point of attack. That can allow guys, when you think about the full picture, like Mahogany, that can allow guys like that to thrive. Mahogany's a really good puller. Miles Frazier is a very effective puller out of LSU. We don't know much about him in the NFL, but we do know a little bit about Mahogany. We know about him from Boston College. We know about Miles Frazier from LSU. Both those guys can pull really well, especially Mahogany. I think about Graham. He's very impactful as a guy that can down block, can seal guys, can get himself in a pretty good position, and at very least hold up long enough to at least allow the run to get past him. He may not sustain incredibly well and strain incredibly well throughout the entirety of the rep, but early on, he can consistently usually get himself to a spot where he can do his job enough so that that run can pop and then get past him, pass protector. I did like that consistency and anchoring footwork. To me, what I liked is that he played wide off the ball. You didn't get him skinny immediately, so there was some anchoring there, and he played with really good footwork. He's a really effective drag hand as a run blocker and as a pass protector. He played with really nice vision where he would go give support late. He played with nice vision. That was active. This past year, he showed that. This year, he showed that. He shows it at center. I think that helps him. He's quick off the ball. He shows active eyes, and that helps him as a pass protector specifically, keeping his feet on the ground. He could stay connected. He could find second and third effort wins and just find a way to keep a guy off the quarterback, even if it was ugly, because he'd keep his feet on the ground typically. He'd stay with his feet on the ground. He'd stay pretty wide. And because that, he allowed himself to just find some late connection and find a way to win late. The negatives, however, and we'll fly through some of these that I haven't hit on, is there's a couple things here. Reactive quickness didn't look fantastic this past year. The range that he showcased as a guard, from A gap to B gap, covering up multiple gaps, he didn't look great this past year. A gap to A gap as a center, that might be better for him. It absolutely could be. At this point in his career, maybe that's better because he still showed quickness off the ball. I just didn't think he looked that rangy. I thought he struggled as things got a little bit wider. I started in terms of stunt pickups, while he may recognize it, and he passed things off well. And as guys like you saw, Mozzie Smith, he tried to attack him on a stunt this past year. He tried to wrap himself around, but he played so wide that, hey, Graham's still doing a really good job. He picks it up, he recognizes it, he passes things off, and he gets to his spot. The problem is he just wasn't overly quick there, and he'd pull himself a little bit too far out of play. So guys that would stunt really well, they would get on an edge. They would get upfield. Speaking of getting on an edge, when guys would get on an edge this past year, I thought that Graham Glasgow struggled to recover. I thought that he struggled with it. He didn't look incredibly loose. He looked a little bit tight. He didn't look incredibly loose to recover and say, oh, I'm going to get back into play completely and hold this guy off, or I'm going to actually flip my hips open and cut this guy back off. It was like, no, he kind of gave him an edge, and that's probably going to continue. He might do enough in just terms of straining to keep him off the quarterback. I don't think it matters which guard spot you put him on, because one of my theories was maybe at right guard he's more comfortable with his hand usage, because last year his hand usage to me was one of the biggest problems for him, and it showed up in pass protection specifically. The biggest problems that I noticed was hand usage. Smaller guys gave him problems. Ed Oliver, shorter defense tackle, very quick, gave him a lot of problems, got to spots quickly. Dallas, Oso Digizua, guys gave him problems. Hand usage to me was a big culprit of why that was the case. First off, he didn't look overly quick with his hand to allow guys into his chest. He would allow guys to get into his frame. You'd notice it as a run blocker. He'd allow guys to get into his body, and they'd kind of control the block from there. His hand usage was inconsistent, since that it was pretty predictable. You could tell when he was going to try to strike, play with high hand usage. Now, there was some really good in there, and I actually think that one of the arguments for center could be that his hand usage to me looked a little bit better. The games that he played at center, I thought his hands were better. Now, I won't put a lot of stock into this past year because he was playing Seattle. They didn't have much on the interior to me in terms of guys that were threatening him a ton from that spot. I think there's some that plays into that. But I think that his lack of range and also inconsistent hand usage did actually play out better at center, because he was still quick. He was still quick into his spots, and he still had an ability to pass off and deal with a lot of movement and understand, like, okay, I got to slide this way. I got to slide this way. What am I seeing? He wasn't consistently in the wrong spot. His hand usage just wasn't consistent. And for me, both guard positions didn't really matter. I don't think that's going to matter next season specifically. That was one of my takeaways as well. Again, he wasn't a guy that was going to clear out blocks on double teams. He didn't play with consistent leverage as a hedge blocker. So while he could play with some bend as a pass protector, he didn't play with fantastic leverage where he can maul guys out of plays on double teams and hedge up to the next level and create a ton of movement to there. The stunt quickness in terms of pickups was a little bit limited, specifically this past season. Weight to me could be a problem, is where specifically he could fail to keep his weight back. He would get himself a little bit forward. He kind of lean a little bit forward. He'd get over his toes a little bit. His weight would shift forward. That would lead to inconsistencies. That would put him on the ground. As a puller, when he was kind of working to pick up guys, he didn't look overly agile. He didn't look that agile in traffic this past year. Athletically speaking, he just didn't look overly agile this past year, overly fluid. And you felt that as a puller when he was trying to redirect with guys. You felt the control, but short area movement didn't look fantastic. In traffic, it didn't look fantastic this past year either. So for me, the lateral quickness looked average. He didn't look overly loose. The big takeaway for me with Graham was I didn't walk away thinking, oh, it's because he's at left guard. Maybe right guard's better for him. Maybe it could be. The more I watch, I could feel even better about his hands. I didn't think that that was the solution. I think there could be a case for center. I think some of the issues from an athletic perspective could potentially be hidden a little bit from center. That doesn't mean it's all going to go away. That doesn't mean he's perfect because he's at center, but it could hide it a little bit from a range perspective because he still plays quick. It's just the range felt a little bit limited. I do believe there's a case to be made that pass protection from center could fit better going forward for Graham Glasgow. Maybe a little bit less range to deal with, but his ability to quickly set position correctly and be able to help others in pass protection tends to thrive. However, the run blocking aspect of creating movement feels like it would be the biggest issue from the spot. He seems to lean a little bit more on positioning than actually driving players out of their spot, and that may lack a little bit from the center spot. So it could be a give and take. He was dealing with knee injuries. He was banged up a lot last year. He played 1,100 snaps for the Lions. Some of that could have played into it. And I do think that maybe if he's healthier this next upcoming year, he could look a little bit better as a mover. But that was the key takeaway for me from Graham. When I walked away, I felt, okay, he doesn't look overly athletic this past year. So will injury make that better? Potentially, getting healthier. But also, could he just be losing a little bit of a step? That's very possible. He's still a smart offensive lineman. He still gets to his spots consistently, and even some of the games that he graded out horrible, according to PFF, I didn't think he was horrible. Some of the games that he graded out, I was like, oh, this guy was a disaster. I didn't think he was a disaster. He had some bad reps, right? Kenny Clark could give him some problems. We've always seen that. Washington has some good interior quick guys. That could give him some problems at times. Stunts could give him some problems. Smaller interior defense lineman seemingly gave him some problems because he just played a little bit too upright. He's a tall guy. Played a little bit too upright. In the second and third effort, he would lose a little bit. He just played with an upright posture, which would put him in some tough spots. So overall, my takeaway was, did I feel comfortable with Graham after watching those games? I did. And I do think that Graham Glasgow, if you told me he's our starting guard next year, I would actually feel comfortable that he can be part of a great offensive line and he could be a starter within that. I don't think Graham is like this terrible player after last year. His pass protection was the same. He's never been an elite pass protector. I don't expect it to change, whether he's at right guard, left guard, or even center. It could get a little bit better at center, but I don't ultimately expect him to be elite pass protector. I think right now, that just is what it is. He's going to be maybe slightly above average to average. As a run blocker, though, can he be better? And to me, that's where the athleticism showed the most. That's where the inconsistencies athletically showed the most. It showed the most limitations, and he just didn't look like a dominant blocker, but he still showed that he was smart. Ultimately, my big takeaway was, look, Mahogany to me has more questions because I don't know what it looks like beyond 100 snaps. He played really 2 games. He played well in the playoffs at one guard spot at right guard, and then he played pretty well to sub in at left guard. So maybe that helps Graham moving around. Maybe. I don't think it'll do that much. He's the guy that has more questions because I haven't seen a ton of them. Graham is a guy that can be part of a great offensive line. I still truly believe that. I'm not that concerned. I actually think last year was more clarity. It was the clarity of, and I'll leave it with this, Graham Glasgow's not an elite pass protector. So if you expect that, probably don't expect that. He's not going to be that. I don't expect. Is he a good pass protector? Some games will be good. Other games might be below average. That's kind of the range I think he's going to fall into. He'll have some good games. He's going to have some below average games. And most of the time, he's going to be probably middling as a pass protector. But as a run blocker, can he be better? And I actually felt that he was a pretty good run blocker. He just wasn't a mauler. He didn't play that low this past year. And his movement skills seemingly took a step back. He didn't look as athletic. So to me, is that going to improve when you're healthier? Or is that he's losing a step? That's the bigger concern with Graham. Look at it, I say, hey, Miles Frazier, I think that's a starting level offensive lineman. I thought he was like Kevin Zeitler before we drafted him. That was my comp for him. He was a top 10 interior offensive line in this year's draft. I don't think he'll come in as a starter. I think Graham will come in as a starter at guard. I think Tate will start at center. I think Christian will start at guard. I think it's going to be a really good offensive line. But I think in time, Miles will take over that role. Miles is a little bit more athletic to me. He plays very fast with the ball. He also needs to be more dialed in. He needs to play wider. He plays too skinny. You need more consistency there. His entry points, he doesn't always leverage himself. You know he can. He doesn't always do it. But he plays with a real anchor. He's got more athleticism. He's got more recovery upside. He's got more of that. I just don't think they'll do it right away. But I think in time, Miles is a starting level interior offensive lineman. But my guess is that Graham's still going to start this year as a starting guard. There was clarity that we got last year from Graham, and I feel comfortable with him as a starter. And I think that that's a very valuable piece because like Dan said, he can help us for guard or center. He did last year. He is still a very smart interior offensive lineman. So wherever you want to put him, he's going to be it's hard for a guy to be able to play guard, left guard, center, and right guard and play pretty consistently. This guy can play every interior offensive line position like that because he's super smart. He's very consistent in what he does. You know what he's good at. You know what he's not so great at, but he's very consistent. And that is valuable for young guys, especially when you're surrounded by a guy that's played about 100 snaps in the NFL and a guy that hasn't played a snap in the NFL. That's valuable. Graham will be valuable this upcoming season. What position will it be at, and how long will that last? I expect it to be at guard. How long will it last? Maybe about halfway through the season, because I think Miles Frazier is that good. But in time, Graham Glasgow is going to give us a lot of flexibility, and that's valuable. So with that being the case, I'm going to leave it there.